Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning. Let us now begin our discussion of a very important playwright post-independence, Vijay Tendulkar. And the first play we'll be discussing by him is called Silence, the Court is in Session, Shantata Court Chalu Ahe, which is the Marathi title. And it's a 1967 production. And it's one of the first Tendulkar plays that became a part of the new Indian drama phenomenon of the 1960s. And it's also one of the first modern Indian plays where the woman, the female protagonist of the play, becomes the protagonist and the victim of the play. And what is also interesting is the play takes the form of a play within a play. Right? So you have an outer play, an outer narrative frame, and you have a play that is being enacted inside the play within the larger structure of the framing play. And the distinction between the outer play and the inner play is gradually blurred and finally collapsed by the end of the play. The play itself has a fairly simple plot. It's about a young school teacher called Miss Benare, who is accused of having committed infanticide, and for which the court condemns her. And so there is a mock trial. The play takes a form of a mock court trial, where Miss Benare is being charged with infanticide, for which she is punished, she's shamed, and by the end of the play there's actually no distinction between the outer play and the inner play. Now the outer play is of these different characters. You have several characters in the play, all of whom are struggling actors. So they are actors playing characters in the inner play, right? So you have actors playing actors in the play, and they're all trying to put up a play, right, in which they play different characters. And they're all struggling actors, right, and they're all part of a troupe that is headed by Mr. Kashigar. And they're all struggling to put up a new performance for the city. And you have Miss Benare, who is one of the actors in the play, who is also becomes the protagonist of the play within the play. There's an inner play. The inner play takes the form of a mock court trial, where Miss Benare, the protagonist of the play, is being charged with infanticide. The play is, largely thematically speaking, about, is a condemnation, a patriarchal condemnation of women, female sexuality. And, initially there's a suggestion that Ms. Benare has done something which she should not have done, which transgresses social norms, which is to kill her unborn child. And she's also then later charged for having had an affair with a much older married professor, Professor Damle, for which she's also being shamed and stigmatized and punished. And the unborn child is the child she has with Professor Damle, for which she has to be punished. So the play really is about the patriarchal regulation and oppression of women who are unable to actually be independent sexual agents in their own nature. And what is also part of Tendulkar's dramatic strategy in the play is to show how Benare's persecutors in the play are actually as powerless as she is. So so it seems to be, as the editor of the collection of plays by Tendulkar, right? So the main editor of the collected works of Tendulkar, Shomik Bandyopadhyay, who is also very important playwright and director, says of Tendulkar's play Silence the Court is in Session, is to say that it is part of Tendulkar's dramatic strategy that Benare's immediate prosecutors or persecutors in the play are as powerless as she is. And all the exertions to cut Benare down to size are more, they are striving after power than a real exercise of power. Right. So you have Mr. and Mrs. Kashikar. You have a very innocent villager who initially comes to watch the performance of the play, but then becomes a part of the play, within the play, Samant. Then you also have certain other characters. You have Mrs. Kashikar, right, who is rather, subservient wife to Mr. Kashikar. She's always being ridiculed by her husband and silenced. And then you also have another very important characters in the play. So you have Sukatme, who is a rather inefficient lawyer, right? So he wants to be a proficient lawyer, but he's struggling to be one. You also have Mr. and Mrs. Kashikar's adopted son, Rokde, who is unable to attain an independent adult existence. Someone who is independent of his parents. He's always being infantilized, treated like a child in the play. And you also have another character called Karnik, who is, trying in vain to become a successful actor. Right? And Karnik also seems to be, in some sense, a autobiographical reflection of Vijay Tendulkar himself in the kinds of understanding that he has of modern theatre, what theatre means to him. So these are the some of the important characters in the play. And you will notice that as the play proceeds, Miss Benare is initially the center of the attention of all the other male and female characters in the play. And because she's been made the protagonist and the victim of the mock court trial in the play, you'll also notice that that Miss Benare is well aware of the insecurities of these men and women who act with her, her fellow actors, and they're all in some sense failures, and they're all struggling to become what they are trying to become, what they want to become in their lives, but they're unable to. And so Miss Benare is constantly ridiculing them, making fun of them as the play proceeds. But then, as the title of the play itself suggests, Silence the Courts in Session, the court becomes another oppressive patriarchal institution that gradually silences Miss Benare. So it becomes one of those institutions that embodies the silencing mechanisms of patriarchy that forbids women from speaking, right, from speaking up. And so towards the end of the play, when Miss Benare actually delivers a long monologue about her own plight, it's hardly a defense in her case, because she's unable to defend herself against a court, against these men who will not let her speak. So it's a rather unsuccessful self-defense, which actually becomes more an exploration of the lost, foregone possibilities of life itself, possibilities that are no longer available to the woman in question. It's rather symbolic of Vijay Tendulkar to actually portray Ms. Benare, the space of the court, where the mock court trial takes place, as a zone of patriarchy, where the woman is trapped. Right. So if you look at the opening of Act 1, there is a description of the space on the stage, where you have lights going up on an completely empty hall, and there are two doors, one to enter by and one to go to an adjoining room. One side of the hall seems to go leftwards into the wings. Within the hall are a built-in platform, one or two old wooden chairs, an old box, a stool, and sundry other things lie jumbled together as if in a lumber room. A clock out of order on the wall, some worn-out portraits of national leaders, a wooden board with the names of donors, a picture of the god Ganesha hung on the door. The door is closed. Right. There are footsteps outside. Someone unlocks the door. A man sidles in and stands looking around as if seeing the hall for the first time. This is Samant. In his hands, a lock and key, a toy parrot made of green cloth, a book. So You see this a very innocent villager, somebody who's come to watch the performance, Samant, entering the space of the theatre, which then becomes the space of the court where the mock trial takes place. And he suggests that Miss Benari enters later on with, holding her finger. One of her fingertips is between her lips. She obviously has injured her fingertip, which got caught in the door to the entrance of the theatre, and she gets locked inside. Right, and that's what someone says, that shut the door and you've had it, locked yourself in. Right, so it's symbolic to note that she gets trapped inside, and then she gets trapped again towards the end of the second act. Right, so she's unable to actually get out of this space. It becomes a trap. And through the conversation between Miss Benari and Samant, Benari initially seems to be a little flirtatious, is trying to get Samant's attention, and but Samant is not aware of the attentions that he's receiving from Miss Benari. He seems rather innocent, and later on, of course, Miss Benari exploits Samant's innocence to actually ridicule the other characters who are yet to appear on stage. So Miss Benari is, a school teacher, and she begins by talking about how children are far better than adults. They do not have the blind pride of thinking that they know everything. There's no nonsense, she says, stuffed in their heads. They don't scratch you till you bleed. They then run away like cowards. Please open that window. It's become too hot for me. So you can notice Miss Benare comparing children to adults, of how children are not prejudiced like adults. They are not arrogant. They don't think they know everything, and they do not, as she says, they do not attack you. They don't attack you and then run away like cowards. Right? So they're not insecure. They're not insecure unlike adults. So there's a certain innocence to children, a certain sincerity that adults lack. And then she suggests that she has been charged with some accusation that has completely ruins her reputation as a school teacher. Right? She says that she's been slandered. Right? And so she's wondering why she's been slandered when she has been a good school teacher. She says, "My children will do anything for me, for I'd give the last drop of my blood to teach them. That's why people are jealous, especially the other teachers and the management. But what can they do to me? What can they do? However hard they try, what can they do? They're holding an inquiry, if you please, but my teaching's perfect. I've put my whole life into it. I've worn myself to a shadow in this job. Just because of one bit of slander, what can they do to me? Throw me out? Let them. I haven't hurt anyone at all. If I've hurt anybody, it's been myself. But is that the kind of reason for throwing me out? Who are these people to say that what I can or can't do? My life is my own. I haven't sold it to anyone for a job. My will is my own. My wishes are my own. I'll do what I like with myself and my life. I'll decide." And then she suddenly unconsciously places her hand on her stomach, and she suddenly stops. Seeing someone, she falls silent. Gradually, she regains her poise. Samant is embarrassed. So you can make out that she has something to conceal. We don't know as yet what it is, but when she places her hand on her stomach, and after you've read the entire play, then you will realize that that probably the allegation is true, that probably there was a time when she did bear a child. And then later we get to know that the child is Professor Damre's child. One must also pay attention to Miss Benare's poems and songs, the poems that she writes, which suggests her growing knowledge of life, of certain aspects of life like love and sexuality, and the growing control and prohibitions over a young woman's movements once she comes of age. Right. So one of her English songs that she sings to herself is like this: "Oh, I've got a sweetheart who carries all my books. He plays my dollhouse and says he likes my looks. I'll tell you a secret. He wants to marry me. But mummy says I'm too little to have such thoughts as these." Right? So mummy says I'm too little to have such thoughts as these. Right? So it's almost suggesting that she is precocious. She's too young to know things like love, right? Like sexual attraction. And then she gradually mentions some of the other actors and characters who are going to act with her, and she begins ridiculing them to Samant. So she says that, so our chairman, that is the head of the drama troupe, our chairman Kashikar will tell you, Kashikar can't take a step without a prime objective. Besides him, there's Mrs. Hand that rocks the cradle. I mean Mrs. Kashikar. What an excellent housewife the poor woman is. A real hand that rocks the cradle type. But what's the use? Mr. Prime objective is tied up with uplifting the masses. And poor hand that rocks the cradle has no cradle to rock. Right? So she suggests that Mr. Kashikar is a hypocrite, as someone who really who's an idealistic man who wants to uplift the masses, right? But Mrs. Kashikar is someone who, presents herself as someone who is a domesticated wife and someone who aspires to be a mother. But unfortunately, she does not have a child of her own, which is why they adopt Rokde. Someone says, you mean they have no, he rocks an imaginary baby in his arms. Benari, right. You seem to be very bright too. Mr. Kashikar and the hand that rocks the cradle, in order that nothing should happen to either of them in their bare house and that they shouldn't die of boredom, gave shelter to a young boy. And so Ms. Benari suggests the hollowness of their marriage, the boredom of their marriage, the lovelessness of their marriage, and the fact that they need to shelter, they need to adopt a young boy in order to bring life back to their own marriage and to their own lives. They educated him, made him toil away, made a slave out of him. His name's Balu Rokde. Who else? Well, we have an expert on the law. He's such an authority on the subject. Even a desperate client wouldn't go anywhere near him. He just sits alone in the barrister's room at court, swatting flies with legal precedence. And in his tenement, he sits alone killing house flies. But for today's mock trial, he's a very great barrister. You'll see the wonder he performs. And there's a with us. Scientist interfered. Right? So she first makes fun of Balu Rokde, who is the adoptive son of Mr. and Mrs. Kashikar, who wants to project himself as an expert lawyer. Then you have a scientist or an aspiring scientist who has failed his intermediate, Sukhatme. She says we have an intellectual too. That means someone who prides himself on his book learning. But when there's a real life problem, away he runs, hides his head. He's not here today, he won't be coming either, he wouldn't dare. Right? So he's talking about Karnik, so who prides himself on book learning, but he's so bookish that when there's a real life problem, he does not know how to handle it. So there's a gap between his his theoretical bookish knowledge of the world and his experiences of life. And the initial plan is to actually perform a play which is a polemic, an attack on President Johnson, of the American President Johnson for producing atomic weapons. And that's the initial idea. Right? But then later on they changed their mind to Ms. Benari's case of infanticide, to actually make the play a lot more salacious and gossipy and exciting. If you look at some of Ms. Benari's other poems and songs, so for example, she recites a poem of hers, which again suggests her deep sense of isolation. She says, our feet tread upon unknown and dangerous pathways evermore. Wave after blinded wave is shattered, stormily upon the shore. Light glows alive again. Again it mingles with the dark of night. Our earthen hands burn out, and then again in flames they alight. Everything is fully known, and everything is clear to see, and the wound that's born to bleed bleeds on forever, faithfully. There's a battle sometimes where defeat is destined as the end. Some experiences are meant to taste, then just to waste and spend. Right? So her poem suggests that defeat is imminent, that she will be defeated by the end of the play. And so initially, Miss Benari seems to be someone who is filled with vitality. Right? She seems to love life. She can never compromise on her life. She can never grudge her own life, and she seems rather happy. She seems rather lively. But then her liveliness, her sense of vitality, seems to barely conceal a deep sense of hurt. Now that she has been accused, her reputation has been tainted, that she's been slandered for having an affair with an older married man, and also for having had a child with him, for which her whole career as a school teacher, her reputation as a school teacher is being ruined. One of the sub-themes of the play is also about theatre itself, the very form and function of theatre itself, and this comes through in the dialogues between Karnik, who is, as I mentioned earlier, an autobiographical allusion to Tendulkar himself, who is constantly making a comment on theatre, what is this phenomenon called modern theatre, and of course he has a problem with the way modern theatre is practiced, in the way it takes place within a within an enclosed, intimate space, and on a raised platform, on a raised proscenium stage. Sukhatme, for example, in his very flamboyant lawyer's voice, makes fun of Karnik, and he says, "1 minute, Mr. Karnik, shall I tell you what's going on through your mind right now? This hall, you are thinking, is ideal for intimate theatre. In other words, for those plays of yours for a tiny audience, which go over their heads in any case. Yes or not? Answer me." Right? So Sukhatme is actually ridiculing Karnik for the kinds of plays that he seems to perform for a rather small and elite audience within an enclosed space on the proscenium arch. And so he wonders whether Karnik's plays are actually being understood, can be understood by the common masses, or whether they are actually abstruse and intellectual like him. And so Karnik being the aspiring intellectual, although which actually ends up being rather pretentious intellectual by the end of the play. Then Miss Benare continues to actually ridicule Mr. and Mrs. Kashkar for their pretentious marriage. It seems rather sentimental. You must also remember that Professor Damle never actually appears on stage. Professor Damle is never accused, never charged with anything. It's Miss Benare who has to, bear the charges, the accusations of the other actors of the mock court trial for having transgressed social codes of femininity. But Mr. Damle, or Professor Damle, is never accused of having betrayed Miss Benare and having abandoned her after he gives her his child. There are also minor suggestions during the mock court trial. So, for example, there are Sukhatme, for example, ridicules the whole the formality of the court trial. He says that well, we have the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita for the oath taking. I mention it because you want something to read. By the way, Rokde, you did bring along the Bible and the Gita, didn't you? Or have you forgotten? And Rokde seems to have forgotten the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita on which the oath is taken. They seem to actually have instead a rather new erotic and racy pulp fiction novel by this Marathi writer Suryakant Faterfekar. And Samant seems to have a copy of it. And he says that his novels are so thrilling. This is the 105th novel of his. So they claim to almost use that book instead of the Gita and the Bhagavad and the Bible for the oath taking, right? So in some sense, this is also ridiculing the whole formal procedure of oath taking, and in some senses also parodying the very notion of truth itself. Like, what does it mean to say the truth? Who is to say the truth, right? Truth obviously in this play seems to lie in the hands of those who have power, and not those who are powerless. So in fact, the whole play itself, in some sense, is a parody of the truth. It's a satire on patriarchy and the kind of truth claims that patriarchy makes in its bid to actually persecute women for the crimes, the imaginary or real crimes that they have committed. And so, what is interesting is that the court has condemned Ms. Benare to infanticide even before she has committed the act. It's like Ms. Benare is condemned from the very beginning. She's damned either way, right? So it does not, her consent does not matter at all, right? So the very fact that she fell in love with an older married man and had a child with him is enough, is sufficient grounds for society and for the court to actually damn her as a loose, disreputable woman. Right? So she is charged with infanticide even before she has actually committed the act, and it does not matter whether she consented to the relationship or not, or to the affair or not. But then she is guilty. So this is of course a classic instance of the structural oppression of women in patriarchy. So irrespective of whether they are active agents or not, whether they actively participate, whether they have any consent or not, they are damned as potentially guilty. Right. At the beginning of Act 2, again there is another instance of in where court procedure is being ridiculed, right? So the initial scene of Act 2 goes in the different actors slash characters of the play, of the inner play, of the mock court trial, sharing pan, right? And so there's this kind of rather funny competition of between the characters on how quickly the characters can consume pan and how fast they can spit pan out, right? And so there's this whole competition on pan spitting, which takes up much of the time. And Miss Benare is who at this point in the play still has a few lines to say, manages to actually make fun of the dignity of the court. Right. So she constantly has these brief comebacks, ridiculing the institution of the court and Mr. Kashikar, who is the judge. And when Mr. Kashikar charges Ms. Benare with infanticide, she says, "How does infanticide really work? Really, I don't like your word at all. Infanticide? Infanticide? Why don't you accuse me instead of snatching public property? That has a nice sound about it, don't you think? Sounds like snacking." And then Mrs. Kashkar says, "I don't think so at all. There's nothing wrong with the present charge." Benare, banging her hand on the chair, "Order, order. The dignity of the court must be preserved at all costs. Can't shut up at home, can't shut up here." Imitating a lawyer, "Milord, let the court's family be given a suitable reprimand. She's never committed the crime of infanticide or stolen any public property except for Milord himself." Right? So she's imitating the lawyer and the judge, and is actually parodying the entire court proceedings. Then, of course, later, initially she refutes the charges of the court. She says that I couldn't even kill a common cockroach. Why would I kill a newborn child? So she refuses to accept that she's guilty. Then later on, in the interrogation that occurs between Sukhatme, Pongshe, and Ms. Benare, again they ask her what she does. She says, Pongshe says that she's a teacher, a school mom. And so you gradually notice how the other male characters of the play are usurping her voice. They assume Ms. Benare's voice, and they seem to answer for her. Right? So whenever she's asked a question, it's not as though she always has the opportunity to answer the questions. Her voice is always being appropriated by other characters. Then Pongshe tells Sukhatme, who's asking Ms. Benare the questions, Pongshe seems to speak for her, saying that she's unmarried. And Pongshe says, to the public eye, she's unmarried. And Benare says, and to the private eye, Kashikar, order, Miss Benare, self-control. Don't forget the value of self-control. To Sukhatme, you may continue. I'll just be back. Then Sukhatme, the lawyer, asks Mr. Pongshe, how would you describe your view of the moral conduct of the accused? On the whole, like that of a normal unmarried woman, you should at least take this trial seriously. Benare, but how should he know what the moral conduct of a normal unmarried woman is like? Pongshe, it is different. Sukhatme, for example, Pongshe, the accused is a bit too much. Sukhatme, a bit too much, what does that mean? Pongshe, it means that on the whole, she runs after men too much. Benare, poor man. Sukhatme, Miss Benare, you're committing contempt of court. Benare, the court has gone into that room, so how can contempt of it be committed in this one? There's not much point in that remark, Sukhatme. Then Sukhatme, there's no point in coming to grips with you. Mr. Pongshe? Pongshe has slid out of the witness box and is talking to Karnik. Nobody at all is serious. Pongshe returns to the witness box. Mr. Pongshe, can you tell me, does the accused have a particularly close relationship with any married or unmarried man? Benare interrupting, yes, with the counsel for the prosecution himself and with the judge, to say nothing of Pongshe, Balu here or Karnik. Right? So she is obviously making fun of the whole thing. She says that she has an intimate relationship with all the men who are present in the mock trial. So this mock court trial is actually a rehearsal for the play that they're going to put up that very night. But then the mock trial itself becomes a farce, right? A farce of a trial. So they're constantly trying to decipher or read Ms. Benare's behavior. Right? Does she embody? Are there any signs on her of what it means to be a loose, promiscuous woman, right? Especially since she's unmarried at her age. She's in her early or mid-30s and she's still not married. So which is what makes these men suspicious, wondering whether she is out to seduce and trick men. Then they invite Karnik, the aspiring actor, on stage to occupy the witness box. Then they again interrogate Karnik, asking him how much he knows or what he knows of Miss Ben-Ari. And again he talks about the modern play. Again he makes certain comments on modern plays. Sukhatme wants to know what is the description of a mother in the plays that Karnik performs. And Karnik says the life that the new plays don't mention them at all. They're actually about the futility of life. On the whole, that's all man's life is. So, in some sense, the court through Sukhatme wants Karnik to confirm that motherhood is a sacred, pure institution. Right? So, it's something that all women aspire for, and all women as mothers have to honor their roles, their socially sanctioned roles, sacred roles as mothers. Right? So, they cannot question it, they cannot challenge it. And of course, the court is talking about women who are married and have a child, right? So it's the court sanctifies, can only sanction the possibility of having a child within marriage, thereby sanctifying, corroborating the ideal notion of monogamy and motherhood within marriage. Sukhatme, Mr. Karnik, who is the mother? The woman who protects the infant she has born, or the one who cruelly strangles it to death? Which definition do you prefer? Karnik, both are mothers, because both have given birth. Sukhatme, what would you call motherhood? Karnik, giving birth to a child. Sukhatme, but even a bitch gives birth to pups. Karnik, then she's a mother, of course. Who denies it? Who says only humans can be mothers and not dogs? Ben-Ari, stretching lazily. Bully for you, Karnik. Then there is Mr. Rokade's turn to actually appear on in the witness box and to testify against Miss Ben-Ari. And Balu Rokade, who is an infantilized man, somebody who is rather childlike, who doesn't have an independent existence away from his adoptive parents, Mr. and Mrs. Kashikar, is unable to speak. He doesn't know what to say. And then you notice how all the male characters are conspiring together to create a conspiratorial narrative against that would condemn Miss Ben-Ari, right? So it's a story of patriarchy, as it were, as they gang up together against Miss Ben-Ari to confirm their suspicions of her disreputable character. And Rokade now he makes it up. He says that he went to Professor Damle's house, and there he sees Miss Ben-Ari. And from this point onwards, Miss Ben-Ari speaks less and less. Her voice can't be heard as she is gradually increasingly silenced until the very end. Then Sukhatme asks Rokade what he saw in Damle's house. Rokade says that they were both sitting there. What else did you see? That's all. But I got such a shock sitting there in Damle's room, the night falling. And Rokade is unable to say anything beyond that. Then it is Samant's turn to actually extend Rokade's story and to add on to its details. Right? And remember that Samant is an innocent villager who does not know what's happening. He does not realize the seriousness of the mock court trial. So even though the court is being parodied and ridiculed, in the process, the very distinction between the outer play and the inner play is completely collapsed. The charges of infanticide against Miss Ben-Ari become real. Right. Even though initially it's supposed to be just a theme for the play, later on it actually becomes reality, and there is now no going back. That Miss Ben-Ari has actually been condemned of the offences that she's committed. Samant says that I do hereby swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, true enough for the trial. I mean, of course, what's true for the trial is quite false, really. But I'm just taking the oath for practice. Again, Sukhatme interrogates Samant, asking him how he knows Miss Ben-Ari. And then Samant says that, initially Samant says that Miss Ben-Ari is a very nice lady. Right? He has a rather favourable impression of Miss Ben-Ari. And later on, again Sukhatme asks him if he saw Miss Ben-Ari with Professor Damle. And then Samant extends Rokade's story, right? Again, making up details. He doesn't realize the seriousness of what he's doing. He does not realize that he is now part of the conspiracy to gang up against Miss Benare, to condemn her and to shame her. And now he says that he went to Professor Damle's place to invite him for a lecture. The door was locked, not from outside, from inside, and I banged on the door. No, that's wrong. I rang the bell. The door opened. An unknown man stood before me. Guess who it was? Professor Damle. I was seeing him for the first time, so he'd be unknown to me, wouldn't he? Pongshe. Bravo, Samant. Mrs. Kashikar. Oh, he's giving his evidence beautifully. Samant. Damle was before me. When he saw me, he said with annoyed expression, Yes, whom do you want? Pongshe. He's describing Damle to the life. Samant. I answered, Professor Damle. He said, He's not at home, and he slammed the door shut. For a second, I stood there stunned. I began to think, should I go home or press the bell once more? Because I had an important errand. Sukhatme what? Samant. What? Well, let's say something. Let's suppose that I wanted to arrange a lecture by Professor Damle. So you notice how he's making up the story as he's telling it. He does lecture, doesn't he? I only ask because he's a professor. So he must lecture at times. So I stood there, wondering how I could go back without arranging the lecture. At that moment, I heard a vague sound from the room, or someone crying. Crying? Yes, an indistinct sound of crying. It was a woman. Sukhatme. Yes? Samant. For a moment he stood where he was. He means me. He, I mean I, couldn't understand who was crying. You will ask me why I didn't think it was some female member of Professor Damle's family. Well, from the way the woman was crying, she didn't seem to be a member of his family. Why? Because the crying was soft. That is, it was secretive. Now, why would anyone cry secretively in her own house? Thinking over all this, I stood where I was. Just then I heard some words. Mrs. Kashikar, some words. Karnik and Pongshe, who spoke? Samant. You're not supposed to ask. This gentleman, the counsel, you will ask me. Sukhatme, who spoke? Samant, the woman, of course, the one inside. Mrs. Kashikar, good heavens, tell us, do tell us, who was she? Samant, no, he will ask me, the counsel will, not you. Sukhatme, I am asking, tell us quick, Mr. Samant, what were the words you heard? Don't waste time. Tell us quick. Mr. Samant, be quick. Samant, the words were, shall I tell it all? Sukhatme, whatever you can remember, but tell us. Samant, if you abandon me in this condition, where shall I go? So he is looking at a book in his hand, is reading out a line from it. If you abandon me in this condition, where shall I go? Binare is tense. Mrs. Kashikar, is that really what she said? Samant, how can I tell you? Sukhatme, then who or else on earth can? Samant, no, I am telling you the professor's answer. His answer, Professor Damle's. Sukhatme, oh I see. Samant, where you should go is entirely your problem. I feel great sympathy for you, but I can do nothing. I must protect my reputation. At that she said, that's all you can talk about, your reputation. How heartless you are. He replied, nature is heartless. So it does not matter whether this event, this illicit relationship actually happened or not. The entire play really is an imagination of patriarchy. And it's patriarchy's imagination of what a woman can do, which is then being read as transgressive, something which goes against the social codes of chaste femininity, right? Because the ideals of femininity lie in being a good chaste wife and a good mother. Right. So the entire play really is a play on that. I mean, whether it really happens or not doesn't matter. It's really a structural problem. Right. The woman is potentially guilty for her real or imaginary crimes simply because she is capable of acting upon her own sexual agency. So the fact that there's a possibility that a woman may want to choose her own lover, not be married to him, or probably have a child with him, right? There is something which is being condemned. It's being forbidden, right? And so Miss Benare feebly tries to defend herself by saying that it's all a lie, a complete lie, but then nobody wants to listen to her because she's already been condemned with the charge, right? So she's been condemned even before the trial begins. And so Samant fills up the missing details of the story that's begun by Rokde, and he imagines that Miss Benare had been jilted and betrayed by Professor Damle, who no longer wants to take care of her once he discovers that she's bearing his child. So while she only worshipped his intellect, his mind, she claims that he was only interested in her body. He was only interested in in having fun, right, and not taking any responsibility for the act that he's committed. And so the entire court is shocked when they get to know that the Professor Damle is the father of the unborn child, which then has to be killed to redeem the woman's reputation and the larger reputation of society itself. And by the end of Act 2, again, Miss Binare is unable to escape from the court because the door has been locked from outside. So you see the second moment where she is symbolically trapped within this zone of patriarchy. Again, in Act 3, there's a continuation of the mock court trial. And you also notice by now how Samant has lost all his innocence. He begins by being a very innocent person, but by now he's been corrupted. The mock court trial by patriarchy, which and whose mechanisms operate through the institution of the court. And then again, during the interrogation between of Mrs. Kashikar and Kashikar and Mrs. Kashikar, both of them disapprove the fact that Miss Binare is unmarried at the age of 34. And so therefore she says that she's not less than 34. I'll give it to you in writing. What I say is our society should revive the old custom of child marriage. Marry off the girls before puberty. All this promiscuity will come to a full stop. If anyone has ruined our society, it's Agarkar and Dhondo Keshav Karve. That's my frank opinion. Right? So you have the voice of the conservative orthodox who believe that child marriage should be brought back because they cannot tolerate the possibility of women being unmarried well into their 30s. And so she thinks that marriage is the only solution to promiscuity. Again, Mrs. Kashikar goes on to say that at her time, whether a girl was snub-nosed, sallow, hunchbacked or anything, she could still get married. It's the sly new fashion of women earning that makes everything go wrong, right? So that's how promiscuity has spread throughout our society, is what she says, right? So give women independence, financial independence, emotional independence, and then they become promiscuous, right? So women should not be given any kind of freedom. They should be bound. Their sexuality should be harnessed and domesticated to serve the interests of the family. So again, Mrs. Kashikar, like the other characters, is trying to closely read Miss Benare's embodied behavior, right? She seems to be too jolly, too cheerful, right? That itself for her is a suspicious sign of her promiscuity, right? So that she doesn't seem to be bound. Her behavior does not show, the way she comports and carries herself does not suggest that she is a chaste woman. What's also important to note is that the other male characters, especially Rokde and Sukhatme, suggest that at various points in the third act of the play, suggest that Miss Benare tried to seduce them and tried to also convince them to get married to her so that her child can have a father. Right? So many of the men in the male characters in the play are secretly desire Miss Benare, right? Even though they will not openly acknowledge it, they all want to have some kind of relationship with Miss Benare. Right? So they want to, in some sense, they are allured by the possibility of a woman who is so, free and bold, right? So they're very attracted and drawn to a woman who is so sexually bold, seems to be therefore sexually available to them. But at the same time, they're not able to associate themselves with her. None of them will marry her because she does not embody the ideal type of a chaste woman, right, of a chaste wife. So there is this paradox, this contradiction that operates within patriarchy, where all the men, in some sense, are drawn. I mean, that's the very reason why they actually have a trial on Miss Benare's alleged infanticide, is because they want to participate in a trial which which dissects Miss Benare's life as a source of salacious gossip and forbidden desire, right? So they all participate in that patriarchal mock trial, where they all have a share in dissecting and exposing Miss Benare and humiliating her, and they seem to derive a certain pleasure out of it. But they also have to maintain a certain distance because they cannot be seen being with someone who is not an ideal woman. So at various points in the third act, Pongshe and Rokde suggest that Ms. Benare tried to seduce them and tried to convince them to get married to her. And then Pongshe discovers that she keeps a bottle of TIC-20, which is a pesticide, in her purse, right? So they accuse her of having tried to commit suicide because of her alleged past, sexual past. So they think that that the fact that she possesses TIC-20 in her purse suggests that she's guilty, of having had an illicit affair and for having had a child out of wedlock. Pongshe said, claims that he received a letter from Ms. Benares asking him to meet her. I have something to discuss with you. Come at 1:15. Wait in the Udupi restaurant just beyond the school. And then Ms. Benare, Pongshe claims, came looking quite guilty. Then she says, he claims that Ms. Benare could not tell him what she wanted to say in public. So they go to the family room, right? And there she opens out the purse to take out a handkerchief. And out of it rolls a small bottle of TIC-20. And then Pongshe says that she made known her desire to marry me. Karnik and Kashikar are shocked. They say, what? Kashikar says, this appears terribly interesting, Sukatme. Sukatme, true, my lord, it is and it will be. Did she tell you she was in love with you, etc.? Pongshe, no, but she told me she was pregnant. Benare is sitting like a block of stone, drained of colour and totally desolate. Karnik, are you telling the truth, Pongshe? Pongshe, what do you think, that I am lying? Kashikar, who was the father? Continue, Pongshe, continue, don't stop there. Sukatme, Mr. Pongshe. Pongshe, Miss Benare made me promise never to tell anyone the name of the man who had made her pregnant. So far I've kept my word. But who was it? Kashikar, what will you take to shut up? He tells his wife. The cat will be out of the bag soon. And then later on, Pongshe claims that Miss Benare wanted to get married to him. And finally, of course, Pongshe suggests that Professor Damle is actually the father of the child. Karnik and Rokde also suggest that Miss Benare took her turns seducing them to, convincing Rokde, for example, to marry her. Right. So there are all these allegations, that they place on Miss Benare. And so finally, towards the end of the play, Sukatme, of course, is the voice of the court of legal action of patriarchy, suggesting that Ms. Benare has slandered the very institution of motherhood by having a child outside marriage, and has also slandered the institution of motherhood by killing the child, the unborn child. Right? So she has no choice but to kill the child. But if she kills the child, then she is still charged with the offense of having slandered the very institution of motherhood. Right? So she has no choice but to be damned and condemned for what she has done.
इस बात को नोट किया जाए। चुप कराने वाले कौन हो तुम लोग? मुझे चुप कराने वाले ये चुप नहीं रहोगे। बोलोगी, मैं चीखोगी, चिल्लाऊंगी।
मुल्जिम मिस बेनारे, अगर आपको अपनी सफाई में कुछ कहना है तो आपको 10 सेकंड दिए जाते हैं।
इतने बरस बीत गए और मैंने कुछ कहा ही नहीं। कितने पल आए और चले गए। कंठ में तूफान उठे पर मैंने उनका गला वहीं घोंट दिया। दिल में आक्रोश उठे पर हर बार मैंने अपने होठों को और जोर से भींच लिया कि मुझे पता था कि मुझे कोई नहीं समझेगा, कोई समझना चाहता ही नहीं। पर धीरे धीरे मैं इन लोगों को समझने लगी कि ये कितने बेवकूफ, नासमझ और बचकाने हैं। जिसे मैं अपना समझती थी वो भी जी किया कि इन पर हंसू और हंसती रहूं, पर तभी दिल रोने लगा। छाती फट जाए तो अच्छा है, ये जान निकल जाए तो अच्छा है। जिंदगी का एक ही सत्य है, शरीर। तुम मानो ना मानो, यही सच है। हाँ, मैंने प्यार किया। मेरी उस नाजुक उम्र में वही तो था जो मेरे पास आया, मेरे तन के, मेरे मन के। उसी ने मुझे प्यार दिया। मुझे क्या पता था कि स्वयं को खोकर जिसे पाना हो, जिसके साथ जीवन सार्थक लगने लगे, अगर वो आपकी मां का भाई हो तो वो फिर पाप हो जाता है। 15 साल की ही तो थी मैं। पाप क्या होता है नहीं जानती थी। मां कसम, जब बात सामने आई तो सबने मेरा विरोध किया, मां ने भी। और वो आदमी डरपोक कहीं का दुम दबा के भाग गया। मुझे इतना गुस्सा आया, मुझे इतना ज्यादा गुस्सा आया उस पर कि मन किया कि बीच बाजार में उसे खड़ा करके उसका मुंह तोड़ दूं और उस पर थूकती रहूं। पर मैं मन से टूट गई थी। घर के चज्जे से कूद पड़ी। मरी नहीं, तन से नहीं मरी, पर फिर सोचा मन से तो मर ही गई हूं। पर नहीं, मैंने फिर से प्यार किया, अपनी अधेड़ उम्र में, समझदारी के साथ। मैंने सोचा इस बार कुछ अलग होगा। वो प्यार था ही नहीं, वो तो भक्ति थी। उनकी बुद्धि, उनका ज्ञान। पर मेरे तन का प्रसाद पाते ही वो बुद्धिमान देवता चलता बना। वैसे वो देवता ही नहीं था, वो था सिर्फ एक आदमी, जिस्म के पीछे भागने वाला एक भूखा आदमी, तन का गुलाम। छी, मुझे नफरत है इस तन से। मुझे गुस्सा आता है इस तन पर। पगली, इस तन को छोड़कर तू जाएगी कहां? और ये भी तुझे कैसे छोड़ेगा? तेरा तन ही तो तुझे वेदना देता है और वही देता है तुझे आनंद। इनकार करेगी इस बात से? अब इस तन में पल रहा है उस पल का एक नन्हा गवाह, मेरा बच्चा, मेरा जीवन। अगर तू लड़की है तो डरना मत। अपनी इच्छाओं से, आजादी से, दुनिया के रीत रिवाजों से, किसी से भी तू डरना मत। और अगर तू लड़का है तो याद रखना कि हर औरत की तू इज्जत करना, सम्मान देना। जितनी कीमती तेरी इच्छाएं हैं, उतनी ही कीमती उसकी भी है। मुझे मेरा ये तन चाहिए उस नन्हे के लिए नहीं, मुझे ये तन अपने लिए भी चाहिए। ये तन, ये मन, मैं जो चाहूंगी वही करूंगी। मैं अपनी जिंदगी अपने तरीके से जीने की।
आपको 10 सेकंड का टाइम दिया गया था अपनी सफाई पेश करने के लिए, लेकिन आपने अपनी सफाई में कुछ नहीं कहा। काउंसिल फॉर डिफेंस, यू मे प्रोसीड।
And towards the end, Miss Benari's monologue is not really, an attempt to defend herself, right? She's unable to actually say anything in response to the charges that have been leveled up against her, and she just says that she seems to be talking to herself more than addressing the court, right? So she says that I have a lot to say. For so many years, I haven't said a word. Chances came and chances went. Storms raged one after the other about my throat, and there was a wail like death in my heart. But each time I shut my lips tight, I thought no one will understand. No one can understand. When great waves of words came and beat against my lips, how stupid everyone around me, how childish, how silly they all seemed. Even the man I call my own, and so on and so forth. So she really talks about the meaning of life itself, the fact that people take their lives for granted, that she was happy, but unfortunately, you realize the value of life only after you have escaped suicide. In fact, she tries to commit suicide and she fails, but it's only after she fails that she realizes how much she had taken life for granted. She obviously wants to end her life because of the shame that she's been put through, but then she also realizes that she has a very ambiguous relationship to life, really. She has a very ambiguous relationship to her own body, because her body, which has become the embodiment of shame and looseness and promiscuity and all the charges that are being leveled up against her by society, is the only thing that she really has, right? Her body is the sign of life, right? Life is a betrayal, life is a fraud, she says. Life is a drug, life is drudgery, life is something that's nothing, or a nothing that's something, and yet life and the body is all that she has, right? She has nothing else left to live for but to live for herself, to live for her own life, right? And that's exactly what the problem is, that even though she tries to feebly defend herself, that she's entitled to her own private life, she's entitled to her own body, and yet she's unable to escape from the social structure that condemns her to a life of shame and disrepute, right? So she's really struggling with herself and with her own embodiment. That she said that this body is a traitor. I despise this body and I love it. I hate it, but it's all you have in the end, isn't it? It will be there, it will be yours. Where will it go without you? And where will you go if you reject it? Don't be ungrateful. It was your body that once burnt and gave you a moment so beautiful, so blissful, so near to heaven. Have you forgotten? It took you high, high, high above yourself into a place like paradise. Will you deny it? And now it carries within it the witness of that time, a tender little bud of what will be the lisping, laughing, dancing little life, my son, my whole existence. I want my body now for him alone. So she really wants to live. The only reason for her to live now is for the child, for the life that she's carrying within her body, right? So she, of course, does love the fact that she could become a mother, but now she also realizes that she has no choice but to kill the child. She has been compelled to do it, right? So the very raison d'etre of her existence seems to be lost now because of patriarchy, right? And so she is condemned, right? So she's unable to escape the structure of patriarchy, which condemns her to a life of shame, and yet she has no choice but to embrace it, because that is all that she has, right? So towards the end, she's completely silenced. So even though there's a long monologue, it does not appear as a successful self-defense of any sort, but it's really more a tussle, a struggle that she has to bear within herself, with herself. Right? So that actually ends our discussion of Silence the Courts in Session. Let us just go over the slides just to summarize our discussion. So the play describes the patriarchal enslavement of women within the space of a court and a mock trial. The court symbolizes a space of patriarchy where Miss Benari is trapped twice. What begins as a mock trial can no longer be distinguished from the actual play within the play by the end. Benari betrays her own crime of bearing an illegitimate child outside marriage and falling in love with a married man named Professor Damle, who never appears on stage despite the fact that he is also responsible. Ms. Benari's songs and poems suggest her own sense of isolation and loneliness. She is accused of being sexually promiscuous and of being a disreputable character by the other characters. The male characters in the play, including Sukhatme and Pongshe, wish to have a relationship with a bold woman like her, but end up distancing themselves from her because she does not conform to the ideal of a chaste wife or woman. She is charged with infanticide even before her crime has been determined. She is condemned to be punished and shamed because she has desecrated the institution of marriage and motherhood. Her monologue is hardly a defense against the charges. It is more a conversation with herself about the significance of life and her own desire to live, to be a reputed school teacher. She occasionally ridicules the other characters, who are all struggling and insecure actors, but she's progressively silenced and her voice is usurped by other characters, including Mrs. Kashikar, who's also a participant and beneficiary of patriarchy, even though she's often humiliated and silenced by her own husband. Even Samant, who's initially an innocent villager and watcher, gets involved in the conspiratorial machinations of patriarchy to trap and victimize a woman for her unconventional life. Miss Benare claims Professor Damle loved her for her body while she worshipped his intellect. The other characters like Pongshe and Sukatme accuse her of trying to seduce them when she wanted a man to love and be a father to her child. Karnik believes she had an affair with her uncle when she was young. Benare has an ambiguous relationship to her body, which is a vehicle for movement and freedom, but also condemned to be stigmatized by others. Thank you.